hard for me to talk about that fever, but it's not. Even though it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, that fever that came on suddenly, and it came on not very long after that no-good son-in-law of mine just up and left his family. Without any warning, one day out of the clear blue, my son-in-law, Simon, left. Left his business, left his family, left his wife, my daughter, the person I love more than any other person in the world, just up and left. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Have you ever seen such a thing? Well, I hadn't, and it made me sick. Talk about irresponsible. Now, I never liked Simon to begin with. But it wasn't my say who my daughter was going to marry. I wasn't allowed to have a say. That was my husband's decision. And what I saw as detriments to his character, oh, my husband didn't see any of that at all. Let me tell you about that no-good son-in-law of mine. He's hard-headed. Hard-headed. Can't get anything through him. Flighty. Never could tell what he was going to do or say. That had the makings for being a disaster in a marriage, let me tell you. But did my husband see any of that? No. Hard-headed, he said? Why, that's a skill that will come in handy when he's doing business. He'll get a better price for the fish. He'll have more command of his employees. And that concern I had about it being flighty, well, my husband said, just you wait. As he grows older, as he matures, he'll calm down. Shows what he knew. No, and one of the most irresponsible things a person can do, that Simon, that no-good, dirty, rotten, irresponsible son-in-law of mine just up and left. And where was he to deal with the fallout of that decision he made on his own to go off following some preacher wandering around the countryside? Where was he to deal with the mess he left behind? Where was he when his wife was sobbing uncontrollably when she learned her husband had up and left her? Where was he? Don't know. He was off somewhere. But do you know who was there? I was there. Because I am her mother. And where was he? Where was Simon, that no good, irresponsible, dirty, rotten son-in-law of mine, when my daughter had to deal with things no woman should have to deal with? Because now there were questions about the fishing business and the family and the house. Huh? Where was he to see what a burden that put on her? Who knows where he was, off wandering around with that preacher? But do you know who was there? I was there. Because I am her mother. And where was he when those children, his children, were frightened because they didn't know where their father was or if he was going to come home? Where was he to face the mess that he had made? Who knows, off wandering around somewhere? But you know who was there? I was there. Because I am their grandmother. And that is what I do. I care for those that I love. I give. I provide for. That is what I do. And it made me sick every day to watch what my poor daughter had to go through. And every day I got madder and madder and madder at that no-good, irresponsible son-in-law of mine, and I vowed that if I ever got within a stone's throw of that irresponsible, no-good son-in-law of mine, why, I just might forget that I'm a respectable woman of position, and that Simon might find himself in a situation where he won't physically be able to go walking around following anybody. And he'll be praying that his broken bones will heal so he can hopefully throw something into the water in the future, maybe a net. And that's where I was, burning with that anger, sick to my stomach watching my daughter suffer, when the fever came. The fever came unexpectedly in the middle of the night, and it was awful. I couldn't move. The pain was so bad. I couldn't even open my eyes, let alone speak. It was awful, and all my family could do was put me in some corner in the room of a house no light was allowed into. And there I was in that darkness. But I wasn't just in the darkness that's the kind of darkness where you can't see. It's the kind of darkness where the darkness is all around you. You can feel it. Have you ever been in a darkness like that? I could feel the darkness pressing on me. It was awful. And while I suffered in that darkness, my family did what they were supposed to do. They went and took that knife of solid iron, and they tied it using a braid of hair on a bush outside the house. They did that 3 days in a row. And then they said that incantation that was supposed to ease that fever, make it better. But it sure didn't make the fever any better. In fact, it made it worse. And I began to burn. And I couldn't tell if the burning sensation was from outside or inside. I just lay there in that darkness, helpless. And I felt like I was going to die. And I prayed for mercy for my poor daughter, who I love more than any other person in the world. Because how would she deal with losing another person? And I laid there sick because I couldn't help. I couldn't do what I do. My daughter needed me, and there I was, helpless, a burden. Now she was taking care of me. I'd lost my own position in my own home because of this fever. I was a person who gave care, not was cared for. And knowing that I'd become a burden to those I love was worse than the pain of that fever. And that's the darkness that I was in, for I don't know how long. And then there was light. Just as suddenly, just as instantly, and just as immediate as that, I was in the light. The pain was gone, and I could see. And what I saw was a stranger who should not have been in that corner, in that room, in that house, because he was a stranger who had touched me. And he shouldn't have done that because men do not touch women. They certainly do not touch women from different generations. But this stranger had touched me. And because he touched me, he lifted me up out of the darkness of that fever and into life. And I recognized this stranger, this Jesus, who happened to be the same wandering preacher that no good, dirty, rotten, irresponsible son-in-law of mine had decided to up and follow. That was the person who lifted me up from the darkness into light, from suffering into life. And as I looked into the face of this Jesus, I knew I was looking into the face of no ordinary human being, but one who had the power of God, because it is God who lifts us up to such light and life. And I knew all kinds of things I hadn't before. Things like that fever had not been sent to me as a punishment from God, which I had thought before, because God is not a God who sends punishments, but gives life. I hadn't even brought that fever on myself by working so hard to help take care of things at home. And that son-in-law of mine, that no good, irresponsible, dirty, rotten, well, maybe he wasn't so irresponsible. Hard-headed? Yeah, okay, he's still hard-headed. But maybe he had a wisdom of recognizing who this Jesus is and the courage to follow him. After all, he had brought him home. And I also realized that the way I'd been thinking before had not been a help to my family or to me, but it actually made things harder. Because I found myself living in a way that I just hadn't lived before. Parts of me that had died away. and gone. Were back. Things that I hadn't even realized were gone. Things as simple as laughter. Why, I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed before that fever hit. And now I can laugh. Things like noticing and appreciating the color of the sky. Do you know that the sky is a different shade of blue depending on the season, and each one is beautiful? I used to notice that. Parts of me like watching the waves make patterns on the water and how that can calm or energize me. Parts of me that had responded to kindness and given kindness back. Parts of me that could smile. And the parts of me that love to hear that soft sound that children make when they sleep. Do you know? Can you remember? That part was back. And I hadn't realized that I had grown cold and cynical. But no more. When Jesus had lifted me up out of that fever, out of that darkness, he lifted me into this new way where I just wasn't fixed or healed or cured. I was well. I was whole. My whole self. And I was more alive than I had ever been, and it felt so good. It felt so great. What I wanted to do is I wanted to touch Jesus back. But not just physically touch him, but to touch back the way I had been touched. And I knew how to do that by doing what I know I can do. So I did what I know I can do. I did it not just that once, but many times. But I did do it that once. I gave. I provided for. I ministered to. I served. And I wish I could make you understand I did more than give Jesus something to eat and more than a place to stay. Because the greatest gift any of us can be given is this: to do that which you know you can do with great joy, and to do that which you love with your whole heart. And that is what I did. And that is living in that life that Jesus raised me up to. And I'm telling you, it felt great. It felt really good. So I wasn't surprised at all when the people came. So many people came to that house that day. So many people with so many needs, just wanting to be touched. And you know, that's something that doesn't really change, does it? Throughout the centuries or the millennia, there's always so many people with so many needs, simply wanting to be touched. And I watched as Jesus touched them all. And they did leave cured. People with illnesses they had been fighting for years. The illness was gone. People who'd been tormented by emotional problems were leaving without them. But what I watched and I didn't understand was I didn't see very many people who left being lifted up. Many of them had been fixed or cured, but somehow they had missed being lifted up. And I just don't know why. But I understand now why they did not know, why Jesus could not stay, why he had to go. Jesus had been here, in that corner, in that room, in that house. But somehow Jesus was still here. Even though Jesus is the kind of person who cannot be forced to stay in any one place for any one time, because Jesus came to do that important work of God, of lifting us up out of that darkness into light. Jesus himself would one day be lifted up from death into life, and then everything became new. But have you noticed that wherever Jesus did lift someone up into that new life, and Jesus went on, somehow Jesus stayed, because the person who had been lifted up knew what to do. Just like I knew what to do. I knew to keep doing that which I know I can do with great joy, and that which I love with my whole heart. Because that is what I did. Because they kept coming back to the house. The people, they wanted to hear again what Jesus had done. They wanted to talk again about how Jesus had touched them. And they would bring other people with them. And sometimes people would leave and live a little differently, and sometimes they would leave believing. And sometimes they would bring people, and these people would go and look for Jesus and find him and come back. And soon we began to grow as a group, a community. And as a community, we all would do what we knew we could do with great joy, and that which we love with our whole heart. And we became something new. Something some people called many, many, many years later a church. But what I like to call Jesus is here. Because Jesus is still here today. And Jesus still can lift us up from any darkness, from any fever, from any fear, from any anxiety, from any worry, from any doubt, into new life, where we all can do that which we know we can do with great joy, and that which we love with our whole heart. And that can be a church. That can be new life in our own lives and our own community. You can take my word for it. I was there, just as much as I am here, and Jesus is here.